Hi, I'm Bill. If you don't know me, I'm a lifelong Hoosier, a husband, a dad, and a carpenter. I'm not an expert in this subject area, but probably like a lot of you have been following all the headlines about AI. Before that, I had a casual interest in following lots of technological subjects, including machine learning, when they started publishing things about it back in the early 2000s. The way the headlines have been stacking up lately, there's a I wouldn't say a fear, but maybe an alarm that I think maybe we should talk about. There's a concept in AI called the efficient compute frontier. And the efficient compute frontier is a theoretical limit that they've not been able to get a model to cross. And in their efforts to reduce the number of errors produced by AI, to increase their accuracy and their usefulness, they found in 2020 that they could scale the model with additional data and additional resources that would, and they would get huge gains in its accuracy. So if you imagine a chart with your errors on the y-axis and resources on the x, in 2020 they had high errors with AI saying ridiculous stuff, and people would create headlines about all the ridiculous things they could get an AI to make mistakes about. And they found that once they added some additional resources, additional scaling they called it, then they could reduce the number of errors dramatically. And at that point they started saying that they could replace all doctors and lawyers in the next several years. You don't hear that much anymore because as they scaled and scaled and scaled, the amount of scaling they had to do to further reduce errors increases. So there's a diminishing return. So if you imagine that chart, errors and resources, you can go from high errors and low resources, and as you scale the model, you reduce the errors, but you have to add more and more resources, and the curve starts to flatten out. And if you remember your days in algebra, you might recall seeing curves on a graph that approach a line or approach zero, but never cross it, because that decimal point can always get smaller and smaller and smaller infinitely. And it's that sort of thing. So as they scale the model and it becomes less and less useful to scale it, or the resources you have to add become exponentially higher, it becomes much less practical to scale it. So you stop hearing about them replacing doctors and lawyers, because in order to replace doctors and lawyers you need a very high accuracy rate. In some of these fields they'll use the phrase Six Sigma to express that they need a higher than 99% rate of success. You don't want 1% of heart surgeries in America to be a failure, for instance. So in order to reach that goal of replacing doctors, they needed to get way down to zero errors. But it became clear that as that curve flattened out, they wouldn't be able to do that. So you started hearing, we'll be able to replace all entry-level employees. And then you heard headlines about businesses that had tried to do that and had to back off of that initiative because it was not profitable or it was harmful to their customers. So you stopped hearing about those efforts. And now OpenAI is publishing chatbots, and especially chatbots that engage in erotica with customers. And they promise that kids won't be able to access those, but I'm an elder millennial. I know what kids were able to access when the internet came out, and there were supposedly protections in place at the time. So most recently I started hearing that OpenAI claims that they will be profitable in 7 to 8 years, and then obviously return on investment is much further out than that. However, if they've hit a limit on how much better they can improve their product, then what difference does 7 to 8 years make? And I think back to this summer when there was a chart going around that showed the engagement of users with AI at the same time that school got out. And as you had a high engagement with AI going along during the school year, the day that school got out, I think their chart said June 6th, I'm sure it's different across the country, engagement dropped like a rock, because apparently a lot of the users were using AI to cheat on homework. So in 7 to 8 years, when we have a crop of graduates that has been relying on AI for their entire educational career, businesses may approach a decision where they say, should I use large language models or use the students who have been using large language models their entire time in school. So if they've reached the limit on improving their own product, then it seems the strategy is to make their competition worse. And in this case, their competition is our kids and their education. I believe that we can still pass legislation at the state level that could stop this from happening, that could bar AI from being used in schools, that could protect our kids from getting addicted to erotic chatbots, or even just chatbots that replace their need for friendship. Sometimes making friends is difficult. Social skills are important. And if we don't protect our kids from being stunted by that, then in 7 to 8 years, they may not be fit for business. They may not be fit for jobs or careers. But if we get ahead of this, if we take a lead in the state of Indiana to pass legislation on this topic, then in 7 to 8 years, our students could be the best scholars in the nation. Something to think about.